You're tuned into the Unnecessary Harm podcast, where we drill down on issues of substance use and its cultural impact. Your host, Shane Varco, Executive Director of the Delgado Institute, with over 40 years' experience in youth and community work and a passion for building resilience.
Welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Well, perhaps up until this current generation, pretty much everyone understood that sport and or physical activity, particularly in a non-performance-based team environment, were good for you on many levels. However, with the advent of the handheld device and now inescapable attachment to the online arena, much of that common sense clarity has been eroded. Some very recent research released in the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics underscores the pivotal role physical fitness plays in safeguarding children and adolescents against mental health disorders. Remarkably, the findings reveal that higher levels of cardiorespiratory fitness, muscular endurance, and muscular power significantly correlate with lower incidences of anxiety, depression, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder among young children and adolescents. This is just on a bio-brain mechanical level. The research is in JAMA, by the way. Yet beyond the this important refresher, sport has the capacity to add value to a community on many levels, but it all depends on how it is crafted, led, and the culture those influences develop. Sadly and historically, all too often sporting clubs, far from being builders of good health, fitness and character, can become a place of toxic contagions, much of which is not helped by online cultures. And this is where our next guest comes in. Dave Burt is the founder and CEO of SALT, Sport and Life Training. Dave is a seasoned educator with a long history in the formal education sector as well as the recreational sector. Dave has had a long-standing commitment to building healthy, caring and respectful communities for as long as I've known him, and it's a long time, and SALT is a culmination of that passion. David Burt, welcome to the Unnecessary Harm podcast.
Thank you, Shane. What a great introduction.
Oh, well, it's a very small amount of gravy for a very big potato, mate. Trust me on that one. You're a big potato. It's good to have you here, my friend. And look, it's been a while since we've talked more formally, so we're really excited about today's encounter with you. Now, look, many of our Victorian audience are familiar with you. That's a given. And they know something about SALT, Sport and Life Training, and what that means. But for our national and international listeners, I really wanted them to get some context for them, because what you do and how you do it is in the actual process is really important. And I think its value is being acknowledged and growing. So we're going to talk about that later on. Now, walk our listeners through some of the origins of this work, David. I know you've probably said this a number of times over, but when did it really all birth for you? I mean, when did it start and what was going on at the time?
Do you know, if we want to go right back to the very beginning, it probably started when I was a kid or a young man, where growing up in a home that wasn't a particularly happy home, the sporting club was really my haven. And so I played cricket and baseball and footy in, pretty typically old-fashioned clubs that celebrated manhood and bravery and courage. And they were good men doing the best that they could. But I remember at the age of about 16 going on a cricket trip with older men at the end of the season. And we went to a country pub and we sat around and everybody started to drink. And I expected, that I was going to do the same. So I started drinking and I had a couple of beers at the table and then I threw up on the table because I'd never really drunk before, and they parked me on a toilet and I felt sick. But in my mind, I recall thinking, I'm going to have to learn to drink because that's the expectation. And I was embarrassed that I couldn't live up to that expectation. So as an aspirational young cricketer who really wanted to make the best of my life, already I was being compromised at that point, not intentionally, I don't think, but by men who probably knew no different. And then, sort of fast forward 30 years and my own kids are playing sport, and I start to question the clubs that they're going to go into as to the balance between all those things that you mentioned about the health and well-being that we get when we play sport versus some of the pressures that were still in existence. We saw a society that was moving on in terms of cultural expectations, but still many of the male-dominated sporting clubs were perpetuating this idea that men drank a lot, that it was a bit of a boys' club, that there were sexualised conversations about women, that if you had a problem, you didn't talk about it. And these were blind spots, I think, that were hangovers from a different era, but people didn't really know how to challenge it. And I was looking at it and thinking, it shouldn't be this way. It precludes certain people from feeling as though they can be involved, and certainly as concerned parents, with all the issues that our kids are facing today, these potential wonderful institutions of care are compromising the care that they're giving. So that was part of the driving force, but there was a number of things that took place which just, I think, fast-tracked my desire to try and impact what was going on. And to cut a reasonably long story short, but I ended up working at an organisation called Sports Chaplaincy Australia, and during that time I worked with 7 clubs over a period of 18 months, each of which had suicides within their clubs. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, so look, this is the story of SALT, and I say it in such a way that, you mentioned 7 suicides in one sentence, and it's confronting, but the fact was that over 18 months in my role, I worked with these clubs, and every club I went to had a very similar message, and that was we didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
Now, La Trobe Uni Centre for Sport and Social Impact did a study into sporting clubs around about the same time, and they found out that typically within our sporting clubs, we're 3 times more connected than we are at school or at work. We're there because we want to be, we're invested, we care. But here I was finding myself in situation after situation where people who really cared about the person who had died said we didn't know what was going on for them. And after that, we had wonderful conversations. The tragedy brought on a sense of challenge or vulnerability or authenticity or motivation to do something different because they were confronted by the situation. And I recognised the potential that there was to have real conversations, to look at some of the blind spots and address them. But it shouldn't have taken a tragedy of that magnitude for that to have been the case. So I started SALT as a not-for-profit health promotion charity working at grassroots sporting clubs.
Yeah.
And we have a mental health lens, but we look at all of the different issues that feed into that. So we start at 12 years of age. We have education sessions around peer group pressure and decision-making. We have a course for girls called Unstoppable, another one for them called Empowered. We have a healthy masculinity course, a drug and alcohol course.
Yep.
We have positive parenting, positive coaching. So all the factors that feed into the very, traditional culture that we're trying to challenge in a way that's really positive. So that's what we do, Shane. That was a long answer. Sorry.
No, not at all. No, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted people to get an insight into a little bit of history. And I think context is important, particularly for people that aren't aware of what you do. I mean, what you've shared is certainly not new on the planet. I mean, we understand that. But I think the way you've honed it and targeted it, I think that's a key issue. And I still remember we had a conversation, I think you were teaching at a high school, about the whole issue about the substance use and how that plays into it. Obviously, that's our particular wheelhouse, but we understand substance use is simply a symptom of a bigger problem. And self-medication comes in all sorts of ways, not just trauma, but peer pressure leads to self-medication. I don't want to do this, and I could sit here and tell you story upon story about that kind of scenario, which you've just enlightened us to in your experience. So, again, that's really great to see that. Now, that hangover concept, I think, is really powerful until, and this is where culture takes time to shift, as you know. Again, no one intentionally sets out, I don't think, in my experience in sporting clubs over years. And again, I played sport up till I was 18, and I gave it away at 19 playing footy because it was just a big punch on, literally a punch on. That's all it was. And I thought, I love playing footy, but I'm not here to punch on. That's not my deal. So I switched to basketball. And the contagion dynamic is interesting because we simply repeat what we've been immersed in. We simply reflect what we're immersed in. And what the guys in your setting were doing was carrying that on. And of course, until tragically that interrupter, that shocking interrupter, it causes us to pause, genuinely pause, not just keep rolling on with, have another beer, mate, you'll be right. Have a few frothies, that'll fix it all. Yeah. That kind of, toxic masculinity rhetoric that we've all been subject to at some point. And all of a sudden it's like, wow. And then the vulnerability does emerge. And I think that's really powerful. And that, because, in the chaplaincy space gives you a lot more license to do that than simply a coach. I think there's an expectation of I'm safe with this person. So that gives you leverage as well, which is really exciting. Now, beyond the social media posted highlights of your work, because we all got those, and I've seen your website, and it's great and it's fantastic and the results are good. Can you tell us personally what were some of the profound moments of encouragement for you in forming this, but also some of the real hurdles that you encountered? Tell us a little bit about, wow, the wins, this really kicked open a positive door. And what were some of the hurdles that went, oh, wow, this is tough? Can you share those, Dave, without, obviously compromising or anything confidential?
I can share anything you like with you, Shane. You make me feel comfortable. So when we first began, nobody was doing this kind of work. And I remember ringing clubs and saying that we could offer them these sessions. And I remember getting some responses at the outset, which were along the lines of, it's not our job to educate kids about life. It's our job to put kids on courts or fields or to field teams, and that was really seen as the major role. There was a hesitancy, or even possibly worse, there was a kind of a tokenism that sometimes they would get in an ex-AFL player or somebody that would draw a crowd who would tell a story about living more safely, but it was very tokenistic.
Yeah.
And yet I must say that from the outset, the support has been far stronger than the challenges. And it began because my son was playing footy at the Eastern Rangers in what was called the TAC Cup. And so I offered to be the chaplain to that club of 45 aspirational young men who were in the system of the AFL, basically. So they fed into the draft because they were the elite kids in the area. And in 2013, we won a premiership by over 100 points. And yet only 4 boys got drafted. And 41 boys I saw really drop their bundle. And many of them went back to their local clubs and became much lesser versions of themselves. And again, it comes back to the alcohol piece a little, where they thought, I'll just hang out with my mates and I'll chill and I'll drink. And I saw them fall away from the disciplined, committed, respectful type of people they were in that role. And I was sad about this. And so I spoke to the management at Eastern Rangers, and they gave me the opportunity to write some courses for those boys while they were in the program about who they were and their identity outside of sport and the great benefits of sport to developing character and values and resilience for life, that even if you don't make it through the very narrow funnel into the AFL and everybody puts you on a pedestal, that what you've gained from sport is really significant, and you can apply it to your marriages and to your jobs and to the things that matter more actually than your sporting success. So they were my first supporters in regard to that.
Brilliant.
And then other clubs started to hear, because the kids were fed in from other clubs. So I went out to the Norwood Footy Club and the Chirnside Park Footy Club and the Vermont Footy Club, and I did these sessions voluntarily into the clubs, but they were affirming, and they said, we want to give you a donation towards this work. And then another organisation called Donvale Christian College said, we want to give you $10,000 to start going, so I could buy a projector and a laptop and some marketing material. And it grew from there. And then, of course, I had to form a board, and I had to find people who were smarter than me, which was a very easy thing to do. I just had to gather up a few people.
I'm in the same boat, mate. Walt Disney quote, just jump in there. Walt Disney's got a quote, I believe it's him. He said, a genius is an individual who surrounds himself with people better than him. So you and I are geniuses, mate. Keep going. Sorry, you got the ball going. Yep.
And so, again, then we had some business people who helped us to expand. And then, because at Sports Chaplaincy I'd been involved with those 7 clubs that had had the tragedies in their clubs, they came out of leagues, the Northern Footy League, the Goulburn Valley Footy League, the Eastern Footy League, and so those leagues were very supportive. This was footy at this stage. We only did footy to begin with. I thought there was enough problems in footy alone that could keep us going for the rest of our lives, and there was.
Correct.
Yeah, but we've expanded into over 20 different sports because
Beautiful.
if you say, Shane, most things, it doesn't matter what sport you're playing, it's part of just who we are. And so those leagues knew that the motivation behind this was not a financial one. And so they were willing to promote the work because they'd seen the other side through the losses and the suicides. And because every league knew that they were dealing with issues to do with the issues that we're trying to address, they gave us opportunity to speak at season launches and other opportunities to get in front of the clubs and talk about what we were doing. And then, of course, we had clubs that were ready to roll. They had the right kind of leaders. So I think there's different kinds of clubs. Yeah. And some of the clubs are the ones that you talk about. And this goes back to kind of the barriers to success, because in some clubs you've got the guy in charge and he's the president of the club and he puts in 40 hours a week. And he's an ex-legend and his name's on the honour board multiple times, and he'll show you that and he'll tell you that because he's got a bit of an ego. And he's not very good at delegation and he's not very accepting of change. And so he tries to run things the way they've always been run because to him it kind of suits the way life's always been and it makes him feel safe. But he doesn't realise that he's actually stopping others from getting involved who could perhaps be empowered to do things much differently. So often the biggest barrier is the wrong appointments of leaders within clubs who are hanging on to a bygone era and not willing to delegate to a newer generation. If we're talking senior clubs, those in their 20s and 30s who actually understand that life has changed and we need to accept a much wider version of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman in that club or what it means to be a child coming up in that club. So there's just a few indicators of what worked and what didn't.
No, brilliant, Dave. And I think that's really important because culture shift is it's a long task. It's not something you do quickly. And, of course, as you've experienced, you try and come in and not that you've done this, try and come in and make changes, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, then you're in trouble. I still recall when I first started in this role at Delgado, the then head of AFL coaching asked me to come in and speak to the TAC Cup coaches, specifically around, and the alcohol and other drug issue was a big issue at that time. So we're talking about 15 years ago now. And I still remember having that. A lot of the things you just said just really resonated. This is before, obviously, the experiences you had with the suicide. But just sitting in that room watching these 12 coaches, talking to them, some of them were kind of just rolling their eyes. Some of them were, were quite engaged, but challenging the whole narrative around alcohol and other drugs, and particularly the emerging narrative around substance use moving beyond alcohol. So there was, now we're talking about stimulants and cocaine, crystal meth, all that sort of stuff starting to sneak into the player set. And so we haven't talked about that, and that was fine. But what I found, and this is why I made that comment, was there was about 2 or 3 coaches max that actually wanted to engage with the issue and talk to me further. And I had several meetings with one of them particularly for a long period of time. And he used to catch up and we just talk, and just more of a sort of a one-on-one coaching thing, for mentoring thing for him, just a sounding board. But the head of coaching at that stage said to me, he said, Shane, sadly some of these guys don't see these boys as young men growing. They just see them as an asset to bring about a result. And they don't give a damn other than what's on the scoreboard. Now, I remember hearing that and thinking, from my perspective, I was like, wow, that's pretty candid and pretty disturbing. But then I shifted my hat, took my hat off and put on a business hat, and I thought, well, these are employees, arguably, in a business a sport that's become a business that's now determined its worth by its outcomes on the scoreboard. So I whilst I got it, while it was disturbing, I kind of got that. But yeah, just trying to sew that in. And so when you started this work, I thought this is exceptional and this is not only necessary, but as you've discovered, it's opened up a whole lot of things because people are willing to change. I still remember just one other little anecdote, but there's an Eastern League I won't mention his name, of course, but he was a president, and he was an exceptional guy. And we talked and we got involved with the club, and he was, this is again, just, you were just starting. And so it was really, and he said, look, shifting culture, he even said himself, shifting culture. And he was an older man, tiny bit older than I was, not a lot, but he said, mate, this is tough going. We've got some entrenched ideologies here. And again, culture is hard to shift. So kudos, mate. And it's a really exciting thing to see emerge. And I know it's growing as well, which we'll talk about that later on, a little bit later on. But global, just shifting tack a little bit, Global Men's Health Week is coming up in the 12th to 18th of June, which you're fully aware, of course. It's a week where we focus is not just on men's physical health, but more importantly, their emotional and mental health as well. Again, you're fully aware of, for those perhaps who are not familiar with this particular arena. This is your wheelhouse, of course, which is fantastic. We focus on the alcohol and other drug issue, and clearly that's a symptom of other issues. So we obviously drill down beneath that and look at some of the drivers for that engagement. So whether it's depression or mental health issues or familial violence or whatever it may be, that we kind of look at that. But we, again, as we focus on that, but all too often and again, you've been addressing this, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's really important because of what's been happening recently in the law courts, is what we used to call toxic masculinity, or still do call toxic masculinity, is problematic. And in some clubs it is still there, but it's been slowly gleaned out. It's been taken out, which is fantastic. And again, a lot in part to what you've been doing. But when it comes to the alcohol and other drug issue, what we find is, and there's when this first emerged as a problem and the alcohol harms were being, and familial, intimate partner or domestic violence was growing, the sector was really, really reluctant to assign blame to a substance. And I understood that, alcohol made me do it could be the catch cry, or the substance made me do it. And of course, we don't want to mask, cover up, or give excuse for any kind of toxic behavior, particularly violence, whether it's verbal or physical. We don't want to in any way endorse that. But it's interesting that one thing that particular moment did, and that shifted a little bit in the last 3 or 4 years, but what that did do was inadvertently excise alcohol and other drugs from the debate. So the idea is, well, we know that alcohol may not be the spark or the initiator of the violence or the behavior. It is an amplifier, an intensifier, and a manipulator of that behavior. So it is a toxic ingredient that needs to be addressed. It cannot be simply left on the side as he drinks too much, and when he does A, B, and C. So I'd be interested to have a conversation with you about what does that look like for you when you're dealing with these issues of trying to develop positive masculinity and developing better character and behaviours that lead to strong club building, community building. How do you look at and how do you engage the alcohol and other drug issue in that context?
That is the longest question I've ever heard,
It
Shane.
is, and I apologise for that, my friend.
I'm going to take you right back to where you began. I'm going to talk about coaching, well-being and mental health, then healthy masculinity and drug and alcohol all intertwined, because your question was so long because there's so many factors at play. And we could have come up with a really simple charity. We could have come up with something like are you okay? 3 words, and it would be simple and memorable. But instead, we decided to try and cover a whole array of issues for a whole array of ages in a whole array of sports that have different sorts of ways that they function. So let's go back to the coaching. And the old-fashioned coach used to believe that he could give a spray, he could be fairly disinterested in the well-being of his playing group, because it was all about that scoreboard that you talked about, and that they were assets. And then every piece of research since then has shown that if you're that kind of a coach in today's modern environment, you will do worse than the coach who doesn't pressure the players at all. That if you don't couple together your demands for excellence with care and concern for the individual, then the results on the field will be shocking. And then we look at a club like the Richmond Football Club. So if you're in Australia or Victoria, you know what I'm talking about, that he was a basket case of a club that back in 2016, the coach's job was on the line, Damien Hardwick. There was an ex-player group trying to overthrow the board. That they finished 13th and they lost the last game to Sydney Swans by over 100 points. And at the end of that season, Damien Hardwick's wife challenged him to say, you are a better version of yourself when you're coaching our daughter's basketball team than you are at the Richmond Football Club, because you are real, you're funny, you're sincere, you're natural.
Hey people, just wanted to give you a heads up about a fantastic podcast you should check out. Pathways to Prevention is an inspirational podcast about the best practice journey of substance use prevention and many of the key factors that just make life work better. For in-depth, engaging and exceptional interviews and content, just search Pathways to Prevention podcast. That's Pathways, 2, Prevention, and check it out. Now back to Unnecessary Harm.
Whereas you go to that club and you're demanding and unsympathetic and you don't empower others and and so she was the one
girl. Well done.
Yeah. And so he goes and he displays something uniquely powerful called humility, and he apologizes to the playing group, and they start a whole new way of looking at football. He says, let the scoreboard take care of itself. That's not our focus anymore. It's about connection and respect and care and empathy. And they started an activity called Hero Hardship Highlight, and the players shared, and Trent Cotchin shared about his mental health issues. And he said, once I spoke about it, it released its power. And a guy called Brandon Ellison, it's all documented, I'm not speaking out of school.
No, I know.
He got up and he wept in front of the playing group. He said, I grew up in housing commission flats. I stole from people's backyards. And here I am in this system where I feel so privileged and unworthy. And they gathered around him as he wept and they embraced him. And they showed an aspect of masculinity that they hadn't showed before that created unique ties of
Beautiful.
Beautiful. And then the scoreboard changed. In the next 3 years, they win 4 premierships through having focused on undoing that hyper-masculine or that toxic masculinity, because that's what the club was like. And I had this opportunity recently to speak with Brendan Gale, who's the CEO of that football club. And he said a little bit about similar to what you said, Shane. He goes, don't get us wrong, our main business is to win. If we don't win, we don't exist, and we have to make a certain amount of profit. But we could not have done it if we didn't address what had always been the case, and that was the harden up attitude. Don't you complain because you're getting paid this much money, so go out and do the job that we expect of you. That's how it used to be. So as men gradually begin to embrace that courage looks very different to the courage we used to talk about. And that was when you played, and it was a fight fest you talked about, where courage meant you displayed your anger physically by taking it out on another human being. And so today, courage is far more confronting for the man who's been brought up that way, where he actually has to address what's going inside and be real, like Damien Hardwick was, and confess that he has made some mistakes and that he needs the support of others, and that a good man today empowers others to be the best. So we then move into this violence against women, and sporting clubs can have a very important role to play, because we've perpetuated some things which on the outside don't come across as being violent, because they're not. They're simply disrespectful. They're selective around you've got to fit into a narrow paradigm, and they threaten the safety of men, the minority of men in that hyper-masculine basket that want to keep it that way. But in actual fact, every single club who've looked at this objectively and said, what we're talking about here is our wives and our girlfriends and half the population of the world who actually are equal and deserving of equal respect and care, and it's up to us to become those allies. When they do that, when they do it properly, and we've got a course about doing this called Champions of Change, they come back and go, wow, our club is such a better place. And what is the outcome? That they have less social events that are totally dependent on alcohol, because that's the way it was. It was very unimaginative, very easy to encourage people to pay $130 for all you can drink, and then you've got to drink to get your money's worth. Instead, they'll have a speaker or a guest or some entertainment or some food or some dancing, and they'll have wives. And so instead of the wives and girlfriends going, oh, it's getting to that point at 9 o'clock where we'd better go because it's going to be unpleasant for the kids, they can all actually stay now. Some clubs have board games, and it feels like a family, and that intergenerational care with older people caring for younger people and younger people feeling like this is now their domain is part of what we need to do within these potential influential communities of care in every country town in Australia to address the issues that people are protesting in the streets about, and that's the reduction of violence towards women. Well, let's start when they're 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and what we model and how we run our sport, and let's get those places where kids are dropping out at the age of 16 because it's no longer fun, because they're no longer feeling connected, and make them places that no matter your talent, your background, your unique individual character, that you're going to be valued. So there we go. Coaching, well-being, drug and alcohol, domestic violence, they all relate to one another.
Excuse me. Yeah, fantastic. And that's exactly what resilience building looks like. Appropriate resiliency building. We have different concepts of resilience. Of course, we'll talk about that in a moment. But it's interesting that resilience is not just toughening up. It's the ability to handle hard situations. That is an aspect of resilience. But there's far more to it, as you've just indicated. And our listeners are sort of, I think, getting a lot more of an understanding of what this looks like. And I'm really excited by that. But one of the things that, when it comes to the nature of, and I still remember there was a club in Tasmania that we were dealing with, and we talked about, developing, culture of, care and that sort of stuff. Not to the same extent you do, but we talk about alcohol and other drugs. But of course, what's the driver behind that and what that looks like? This one club in country Tasmania decided to go, to their detriment financially, alcohol-free. They went alcohol-free. And we came in and did some seminars with the parents. We did some seminars with the coaching staff. And they, before football training, they had homework groups so that the kids could come and the older senior players would help with the homework. This is all their own initiative. This is going back about 10 years ago. It was fantastic. And so the idea was that, okay, well, how can we help them do that? And we actually, as you're aware, we have the Isabella's List Award, and sometimes we actually will fund a club. We'll give money to a group or a person or organisation that's doing something like this and help them along their way. But of course, having alcohol-free events was an absolute blinder for everybody else, that no one does this. So where do they get their money from? So they had to find other ways. Now, they did struggle as a club financially as a result, so they had to kind of rework that. They didn't sort of go back to alcohol, but it's just fascinating to watch, yet shifting that away from the central, what became in our culture, the central amenity, which is booze. The Aussie culture. I mean, you can be sitting on the lounge chair in your backyard and the central amenity is alcohol. I'm having a great time. You're sitting in the backyard on a lawn chair having a beer. But I'm having a great time. So we have to get beyond that. And I think we've done that. And what you're doing in a club base is fantastic. Now, you're going national, which is fantastic news. And tell us a little bit about what that looks like and when is that going to be launched, David?
Well, it's happening this year, and it's happening because we partnered with the Bendigo Bank, or Bendigo Community Banks.
Yes.
From the very outset, they've been our greatest supporter. They've been our foundation partner. And from the outset, basically any club who banks with the Bendigo Bank will get their sessions from Salt paid for by the Bendigo Bank. But Brilliant. It's interesting because I had a conversation with the CEO of the Bendigo Bank, Marnie Baker. So here's this CEO of the Bendigo Bank, an ASX top 100 listed company, who understands, because her own family and friends and experience have been through mental health issues, because she lives in Bendigo and she sees it play out around her, because they basically have an imprimatur within the bank that they have to invest a certain amount of money back into community. And they want to see that money create the best social good possible. So while it's important to help clubs buy new sets of jumpers or goalpost pads, actually, if we can help kids to build the resilience and take what they learn from sport and apply it into their lives, then they feel as though they've done something significant. So they've helped us tremendously, but we've actually helped them too in helping the use of that money being put back into community to actually add great value. So Marnie said, no, this is dear to my heart. And
Wonderful.
It's in alignment with the purpose of the bank, which has three major focuses, which is wellbeing, kids and sport.
Mm.
So we've now got the opportunity, and we'll be speaking at every state conference of the Bendigo community banks throughout the rest of the year. We did the first one last week in Bendigo, and appealing to the community banks to promote SALT into the clubs that they already support, and then to help fund those clubs to have SALT sessions. The challenge for us is going to be that the best sessions we do are face-to-face, always.
Yeah, of course.
To begin with, we'll have to do a lot of sessions online because we can't be in every place in Australia, but we'll be looking to try and develop potential facilitators for SALT. So
yes,
one of the ways that anybody listening to this who has a really strong educational and sporting background can help us is to firstly let clubs in other states know who SALT is and what we do. But in time, we need to identify and train future facilitators. And we call them facilitators, not presenters, because a presentation is where you stand and deliver information. But a facilitation is where you have a conversation with the club around what kind of club you want to be and what kind of influence you want to have on the kids, and where does drug and alcohol fit into that, or where does respect and equality fit into that, for instance.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So with the help of the funding, but more importantly, the people that make up every one of those community banks and the directors of those community banks that are typically volunteers who care about their community, we're looking to ignite a community of facilitators right across the country.
Fantastic. And I think that is the absolute key. And of course, you said the term facilitator is about a person invested in their own community. So I think that's ultimately what you want. And difficult as you're starting off, we understand that from our perspective as well. Keeping facilitators when you have no income is always a tricky one. So having people grassroots, I think in clubs are doing that. I think that's really, really powerful. Dave, before we finish up, SALT has graciously become one of our international partners on our World Resiliency Week international platform. Again, we've got people from all over the world chiming in on that one. But there's a global community that are concerned about safer, healthier, stronger communities. Now, substance use of any kind undermines all those things. Now, regardless of whether it's legal and whether it's done in moderation, we're not going to go into that debate. But we know that substances undermine all those factors. They just do. And, of course, the more those substances are involved, the greater the undermining. So that's a given. But what are the from a resiliency perspective, what are some of the key resiliency? You've shared a lot already, but kind of just in a summary kind of thing, what are some of the key resiliency factors that you think young people need emerging in a culture where we're online, the influences are huge, they're consistent, they're almost inexorable. I mean, they're relentless. And what does that look like for them to go, well, I don't want to slip into the alcohol culture has been dealt with, the tobacco culture has been dealt with, vaping's now taken off, and illicit drugs are now starting to become the new space for engagement. What are some of the key resilience keys? What are the key resilient keys that you think a young person needs? Just off the top of your head.
Look, I think there's a number of them, Shane, and I think sport is a great developer of resilience, because one of the first ways that it does that is that it teaches kids how to lose and how to be unsuccessful, and that's okay. So Brilliant. One of the big problems of sport, of course, is that it's about the talent pathway, and it's parents protecting their kids from failure, and that's detrimental. And again, coming back to the example of the Richmond Footy Club, but Trent Cotchin talks about the hero's journey. So we set our kids up on this hero's journey, and you'll hear parents saying, oh, my child plays rep basketball, or my child's child genius, or setting their kids up to believe that they are so uniquely gifted and talented and that their worth comes from their performance rather than from their character or their values.
Mm.
And then he talks about what's called crucible moments, that at some point in everybody's life, life gets really challenging. Something goes wrong. We don't make that rep team. We fail. We get an injury and we can't play anymore, or our first girlfriend breaks up with us. Whatever it is, that something hard happens, and some people get stuck in that, and they never move on from that, and they get bitter and they get angry and they turn to substances, and they become the statistics that we hear about in car accidents and incarceration and divorce and every other thing. But others have a deep set of values. Their family says to them, you're not the center of the universe, but we love you.
Beautiful.
And your performance is not what we value. It is who you are, and it's your character and your values. And so this is how much we love you. But these are the values and the standards and the behaviors that as a family, we don't go outside of. And those two barriers build a very resilient child. But parents are not very good, particularly at that second bit of saying, your behavior was poor there, and while we don't love you any less, there's going to be a consequence for that. And we'll talk about, the reason why. So, we talk about create a new era in your club, but it could be the same in your family. So education, responsibility, accountability. We learn why something's important. That gives us motivation. But then we have to learn to take responsibility for our own behaviours. And if we do that from an early age, then we don't blame the alcohol, Shane, like you talk about as earlier on. But then we can actually hold each other accountable. And in Australia, we're not very good at that because
Correct.
we love to describe ourselves as being chill. I hear that word all the time. When I ask people to describe yourself, they go, I'm pretty chill, as though that's a compliment. And while we quite like the relaxed nature of many Australians, it doesn't challenge us to be our best. So when we're at our best, we're holding ourselves to account, but we actually build into each other's emotional bank account enough trust that we can then say, hey, what you're doing here, I'm worried for your sake, and I'm worried for the impact that you're having on other people. And this is what we're trying to get going in clubs. And this builds the resilience. So what does a resilient person look like? They have enough humility to know they're not the center of the universe. They know that when they make a mistake, that's normal and that they can learn from it, and they have a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset. They actually look at what's going on for others and have something called empathy, where they put themselves in the shoes of others. And even if they're celebrating, they go and commiserate with the person who lost and vice versa. They don't make excuses. They treat people respectfully no matter what those people's background are. They seek to understand what the differences are that lead a person to do things which are upsetting instead of attack them. I mean, I could go on and on all day. They practice.
Please do.
They do a range of things, but I'll come back to the number one. They learn how to make mistakes and move on, and their parents help them to do that when they're young.
Perfect. I think that that last statement is really interesting. We talk about, we have our own definition of resiliency. We talk about the bungee rope of resiliency. It doesn't stop you from falling, but it does stop you from going splat. The capacity to bounce back is very, very powerful, and that what you've just indicated is a perfect, what we call the strands of the bungee rope. They are all strands of the bungee rope, and they start with the family. Sadly, unfortunately, for a lot of young people, growing numbers of young people, they live in environments where none of that is available to them, even in two-parent families, which has disturbed me. I mean, again, we're outsourcing parenting to all sorts of things. But David, they were fantastic, and I want to double down on those. And when it comes to the hero thing, I think one of the things that we and we'll close with this, because I think it's in a culture of influences, that's a new tacit way of talking about heroes. Well, what I call a faux definition of a hero. And it's interesting. We in the years of my involvement in various organisations, we run seminars. We used to run a seminar years ago called Life According to Ralph, Jackass, and FHM. Now those magazines are gone, but they were the masculine magazines at the time that weren't porn, but were basically next thing to porn that young men used to look at. So we did these seminars, and we used to put up statements on the board, pictures on the board of various high-profile people, right? And say, okay, which one are the heroes? And of course, at that stage, Shane Warne was up there, and I'm going to step on a sacred toe here, but they all say they list all the heroes, and and these people that they didn't know, they just ignored. They said, "Oh no." So, well, I said, Shane Warne. I said, look, at the time he was in some interesting spaces with his personal life. Obviously, he got through that, which is great. But during that time, he was bowling brilliantly, but he was pretty much a pretty poor human being. And I said, look, if you want to learn how to be a great bowler, you want to learn how to be a great spin bowler, you watch Shane Warne every move he makes. Every move he makes. Look at it, study it, emulate it if you can, get coaching on it. I said, but if you want to be a decent man, I said, I'd probably walk away from his behaviour and his example. And then I said to the crowd, I said, here's what a hero is. A hero is an individual who does a brave, selfless, and sacrificial act that benefits somebody else. Now, let's revisit our images. Who are the heroes? And all the sporting guys didn't get a rate, not one of them. Because they don't do brave and selfless and sacrificial acts for somebody else. They do great sporting feats, absolutely, but they're not heroes. And I think that what you're talking about before is shifting that emphasis away from influencer and performance to character and substantive humanity that actually benefits others is powerful. And that's exactly what SALT is doing in investing. Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Last question for the day. Last question. We do this with all our guests. Is fence or ambulance? Fence at the top of the cliff for prevention or ambulance at the bottom of the cliff managing damage? Which is the highest priority for you?
It's most definitely the fence at the top of the cliff, Shane. Gosh, if only I could have a dollar for every time I wished that somebody would understand that the ambulance is necessary, but it's not going to change culture in the long term. And if we actually want to address the issues, we have to address them from the root cause at the very outset, and we have to address some of those long-held beliefs that need challenging. So, yeah, we're in the prevention space. We know that political parties don't always want to invest in it because the results take longer. But if ever we've had motivation to start preventative work in this space, we've never had a stronger motivation than we've got right now. So, no, same as you guys.
Brilliant. Dave, awesome. Again, David Burt, CEO of SALT Sport and Life Training. Congratulations on your outstanding work. For those who are interested in talking about and following up on Dave's insights into where he's moving forward nationally, go to their website. Dave, your website is?
www.sportandlifetraining.com.au. Don't type in SALT, just get a picture of white powder. No,
correct.
Sport and Life Training. Spell it out and you'll find us.
That's what I wanted you to say. And look, again, we want to promote that work, and congratulations on your national move. And again, hopefully we'll talk to you again maybe 12 months' time and see where things are up to and have another chat.
Thanks,
David
Shane.
Burt, thank you for joining us today. See you next time.
As we wrap up today's session, remember, each step towards understanding is a step away from unnecessary harm. We're here to empower, inspire, and pave the way for optimal well-being. Stay resilient, stay informed, and continue being the change your community needs. Thank you for joining us at the Unnecessary Harm Podcast. Until next time, take care and keep pushing forward.